Welcome to today's episode of Ancient Explorers, where we uncover the extraordinary stories of humanity's greatest maritime pioneers. Picture this: 3,000 years ago, when most people believed the world ended at the horizon, fearless navigators were already crossing vast oceans using nothing but stars, waves, and an unshakable belief in what lay beyond. You read standing on the deck of a Phoenician merchant vessel as it cuts through the dark waters beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. Behind you lies the familiar Mediterranean, the center of the known world. Ahead stretches the endless Atlantic, a realm of monsters and myths. Yet your captain shows no fear as he adjusts his purple-dyed sail and points toward the setting sun. These merchants have already sailed farther than anyone thought possible, and they're just getting started. Halfway across the world, a Polynesian navigator reads the ocean like a book, feeling the subtle rhythm of distant islands in the swell beneath his double-hulled canoe. He carries no compass, no charts, no instruments, only knowledge passed down through generations and an intimate understanding of wind, waves, and stars. His destination: islands that exist only in legend, scattered across a Pacific Ocean so vast it could swallow entire continents. In the frozen fjords of Scandinavia, Viking shipwrights are perfecting vessels that will soon carry their crews beyond the edge of the known world, to lands of ice and eventually to shores no European has ever seen. Who were these remarkable people who first dared to conquer the oceans? How did they navigate impossible distances with primitive technology? What drove them to risk everything for the unknown? Today, we will follow their wake across the world, great waters, and discover how these maritime pioneers didn't just explore the world, they connected it, creating the first truly global networks of trade, culture, and human connection that would shape civilization forever. Chapter 1: Masters of the Purple Trade. The harbor of Tyre bustles with activity as dawn breaks over the eastern Mediterranean. Workers strain to load massive amphora jars onto waiting ships, while the distinctive smell of purple dye worth more than gold permeates the salty air. The Phoenicians were, according to one ancient scholar, the first to plow the sea. But this simple description barely captures the magnitude of their achievement. These were the people who would transform the Mediterranean from a barrier into a highway, creating the world's first truly global trade network. The Phoenicians emerged from the narrow coastal strip of the Levant, modern-day Lebanon, during one of history's most turbulent periods. Sometime between 1200 and 1150 BC, the Late Bronze Age collapse severely weakened or destroyed most civilizations in the region, including those of the Egyptians and the Hittites. The Phoenicians were able to survive and navigate the challenges of the crisis, transforming catastrophe into opportunity. Their homeland seemed an unlikely launching pad for maritime empire. The Phoenicians became sailors in the first place because of the topography of their homeland, the narrow mountainous strip of land on the coast of the Levant. Traveling between settlements, usually located on rocky peninsulas, was much easier by sea. What appeared to be a geographical limitation became their greatest strength. With mountains at their backs and the sea before them, they had no choice but to become master mariners. The little ports of the Bronze Age Levant, including Tyre, Sidon, and Byblus, lay between the great empires of Egypt, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia. They ferried goods and gifts along the coast between them. But when the old order collapsed, the Phoenicians found themselves free to chart their own course. They turned to their most constant companion, the sea. For the first time, now they headed west. The technology that enabled their expansion was revolutionary for its time. The oldest identified Phoenician ships, two merchant vessels found near the coastal Israeli city of Ashkelon, date to 700 BCE. These weren't the crude rafts of primitive peoples, but sophisticated vessels designed for long ocean voyages. A third type of vessel, also for trade use, was much smaller than the other two, had a horse head at the bow, and only one bank of oars, showing they had developed different ships for different purposes: coastal fishing, medium-range trading, and long-distance ocean exploration. What truly set the Phoenicians apart wasn't just their ships, but their cargo. Their success was due to their ships. They were known for their speed and their ability to maneuver harsh seas. In fact, the ancient Egyptians called boats that could travel in the deep seas Byblos boats, after the Phoenician city-state. They carried precious purple dye made from murex shells, fine textiles, carved ivory, and most importantly, knowledge. The Canaanite Phoenician alphabet consists of 22 letters, all consonants. It is believed to be one of the ancestors of modern alphabets. Through their maritime trade, the Phoenicians spread the use of the alphabet to every corner of the Mediterranean world. Their expansion followed a deliberate pattern. Phoenician ships reached Iberia and then looped around to return east with the winds and currents along the coast of the Maghreb. They visited new lands rich in metals, made new friends, and by about 900 BCE, they had battled their way through the Pillars of Hercules, the Rock of Gibraltar and Jebel Musa, and out into the Atlantic Ocean. This wasn't random exploration, but systematic colonization, creating a network of safe harbors and trading posts that stretched from the Levant to the Atlantic coast of Spain. The crown jewel of their expansion was Carthage, founded in 814 BCE. Carthage was a major harbor, port, and trading epicenter of the Mediterranean world. From this base, Phoenician explorers pushed even further into the unknown. The Phoenicians are among the first people to sail past the Strait of Gibraltar into the Atlantic Ocean to sub-Saharan Africa. Hanno, also called Hanno the Navigator, was a citizen of Carthage who lived during the 5th century BCE. Hanno's voyage stands as one of the most remarkable achievements in maritime history. Another famous Carthaginian voyage, this time by Hanno in c. 425 BCE, reached the Atlantic coast of Africa as far down as modern Cameroon or Gabon. The voyage, whose purpose was to found new colonies and find new sources of valuable commodities, especially gold, is recorded on a stele from the Temple of Baal-Hamon at Carthage. Imagine the courage required to sail into waters no one had ever mapped, past the edge of the known world, seeking lands that might not even exist. But the Phoenicians weren't content with just Africa. The sailors of Phoenicia's most successful colony, Carthage, were said to have sailed to ancient Britain in an expedition led by Himilco in c. 450 BC. Some scholars even suggest they reached the Americas, crossing from the Mediterranean to the Americas. Beale believes would have posed little problem for Phoenician seafarers, though this remains hotly debated. What's undeniable is their mastery of navigation. According to Herodotus, the Phoenicians managed to circumnavigate Africa in a voyage in c. 600 BCE, sponsored by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho. Starting from the Red Sea, they sailed westwards in a journey that took 3 years. This achievement wouldn't be repeated by Europeans for another 2,000 years. The Phoenicians revolutionized not just where humans could go, but how they got there. In another seagoing first, the Phoenicians invented maritime insurance. If merchandise was lost at sea, other shipowners would contribute toward the shortfall. This encouraged more far-reaching, risky, and sometimes more rewarding voyages. They created standardized shipping containers, they're famous, amphora jars, that allowed for reliable trade across vast distances. They established the first international banking system, using letters of credit that could be honored in distant ports. Their influence extended far beyond commerce. Ancient writers described the Phoenicians as expert sailors. They were first to venture from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. By 1200 BCE, they were the dominant maritime power, and they continued to dominate until around 800 BCE. They weren't just traders but cultural ambassadors, carrying ideas, technologies, and beliefs across the ancient world. The alphabet you're rereading right now traces its ancestry back to those Phoenician merchants who saw the practical value of a simple, efficient writing system for keeping track of their far-flung commercial empire. As we stand in that ancient harbor of Tyre, watching purple-sailed ships disappear over the horizon, we witness the beginning of a new age. The Phoenicians proved that the ocean wasn't a barrier but a bridge, not an ending but a beginning. They showed that with courage, skill, and determination, humans could conquer any sea and reach any shore. Their legacy wasn't just the cities they founded or the trade routes they established, but the fundamental idea that no distance was too great, no ocean too vast, for human ambition and ingenuity to overcome. Chapter 2. Riders of the Ocean Swells. 500 miles from the nearest land, a Polynesian navigator named Cube stands at the bow of his double-hulled voyaging canoe, reading secrets in the water that will be invisible to modern eyes. The year is roughly 1300 CE, and he's about to discover New Zealand. But this isn't luck or accident. This is the culmination of the greatest maritime achievement in human history, a systematic exploration and settlement of the Pacific Ocean that covered more distance than all other ancient explorations combined. About 30,000 years ago, human cultures along the western coastline of the Pacific Ocean, in the area between what is now Australia and China, started to migrate eastward across the great expanse of the Pacific Ocean. What began as short hops between islands would eventually become the most audacious ocean crossings ever attempted by ancient peoples. The Pacific Ocean is almost incomprehensibly vast. In total, the Polynesian Triangle spans 6 million square miles of open ocean. And islands, and when viewed ethnically as opposed to politically, can still be considered as one of the largest countries found on Earth today. To put this in perspective, if you laid the Pacific Ocean over a map of the Atlantic, it would stretch from Norway to South Africa and from Boston to Morocco. Yet the Polynesians not only crossed this ocean, they settled every habitable island within it. Over about 25,000 years, these people, called the Polynesians, eventually colonized the islands of the South and Western Pacific, from New Guinea in the west to Fiji and Samoa in the middle. Then they moved onward to Tahiti and finally Easter Island in the eastern South Pacific. The Polynesians colonized the Hawaiian Islands about 500 years ago. The scale of this achievement becomes clear when you realize that finding Hawaii from Tahiti is like hitting a target the size of a tennis ball from 100 miles away while blindfolded. But the Polynesians were blindfolded. They had developed the most sophisticated non-instrumental navigation system in human history. The early Polynesian voyagers were some of the best wayfinders in history. They were able to find their way across vast reaches of the Pacific Ocean basin, navigating by the sun, stars, and other natural cues. Their navigation system was built on intimate knowledge of the natural world. The foundational framework behind the master art of wayfinding, used by our crew members and navigators, is the Hawaiian Star Compass developed by Master Navigator Nanoa Thompson. The star compass is a mental construct and not physical like a Western compass. Imagine memorizing the positions of 150 stars and their rising and setting points throughout the year, understanding how each one could guide you to specific islands thousands of miles away. Some star compass systems specify as many as 150 stars with known bearings, though most systems have only a few dozen. But stars were just the beginning. The Polynesians also used wave and swell formations to navigate. Many of the habitable areas of the Pacific Ocean are groups of islands or atolls in chains hundreds of kilometers long. Island chains have predictable effects on waves and currents. Master navigators could feel these patterns through the hull of their canoes. When skies are too overcast for navigators to use the sun, the moon, planets, or stars, ocean swells can fill in as a rough guide to direction. An experienced navigator can sense the direction swells are coming from as they pass under the waka. They learn to read the reflection of waves off distant islands, the color changes in the water that indicated coral reefs or deep channels, and the flight patterns of seabirds that reveal land beyond the horizon. Clouds hanging over high islands, reflections of lagoons in the sky, plants washed out into the ocean after a storm on land. Wave refraction patterns, swells, bouncing off islands alters their patterns, and birds coming out to fish during the day and then returning to their home island are all signs used to detect land. Every element of the natural world became a navigation aid in the hands of these master wayfinders. Their vessels were as remarkable as their navigation skills. For weeks, they would live aboard boats made from wood and lashings of braided fiber. Thousands of miles were traversed without the aid of sextants or compasses. These weren't primitive rafts, but sophisticated double-hull canoes designed for stability and speed in open ocean conditions. The design was so efficient that modern yacht designers still study Polynesian canoe construction for insights into hull dynamics and sail configurations. The knowledge required for these voyages was vast and closely guarded. Unfortunately, most of the traditional Polynesian navigation knowledge has been lost for several reasons. Most European explorers were skeptical of indigenous seafaring skills, and this was rooted in the deep sense of technological superiority of the Western narrative of the time. Indigenous navigational knowledge was an oral tradition. It was not recorded systematically, and it was also considered secret knowledge, known only to certain families and fiercely guarded. But enough survived to astound early European explorers. In 1768, as he sailed from Tahiti, Captain Cook had an additional passenger on board his ship, a Tahitian navigator named Tupaya. Tupaya guided Cook 300 miles south to Rumutu, a small Polynesian island, proving he could navigate from his homeland to a distant island. Cook was amazed to find that Tupaya could always point in the exact direction in which Tahiti lay, without the use of the ship's charts. The precision of Polynesian navigation became legendary. Several days away from an island, they were able to determine the exact day of landfall. Swells would tell them that there was land ahead, and the surest telltale sign would be the presence of birds making flights out to sea seeking food. This wasn't guesswork, but a science passed down through generations, refined over centuries of ocean voyaging. Perhaps no single achievement better illustrates Polynesian navigational mastery than the discovery of Easter Island. For the ancient Polynesians, finding Easter Island must have been like finding a needle in a haystack. This tiny speck of land, just 64 square miles, sits in splendid isolation over 1,200 miles from the nearest inhabited island. Yet Polynesian navigators not only founded but established a thriving civilization there. The systematic nature of Polynesian exploration becomes clear when we understand their strategy. Most traditional navigators plan their routes using a technique known as downwind sailing. The strategy is to set a course to a point at a given latitude upwind of the target island. Then, when you reach the correct latitude, you turn and let the wind carry you to your destination. This wasn't random island hopping, but carefully planned exploration, designed to minimize risk while maximizing the chance of discovery. Exploring Waka may have followed migrating birds, as told in Maori tradition. The long-tailed cuckoo comes to New Zealand from tropical Polynesia in October, and shearwaters would have been observed flying south in September. People would have known that land lay in that direction, but not how far away it was. They turned the migration patterns of birds into navigation aids, following natural highways across the ocean. The cultural knowledge embedded in these navigation traditions goes far beyond mere wayfinding. In traditional Maori oral history, Kupe is a legendary figure and explorer of the Pacific Ocean, Te Mona Nui Akaiwa, who set off from Hawaii in c. 1300 CE in a waka canoe to discover what lay over the horizon. These weren't just stories, but encoded navigation instructions, passed down through generations in the form of chants, songs, and oral histories. But what this aroo contains are references to stars, wind patterns, and currents that were memorized by generations of navigators. The Polynesians knew the language of the stars. They had a highly developed navigation system that involved not only observation of the stars as they rose and crossed the night sky, but the memorization of entire sky charts. Modern attempts to recreate these voyages have confirmed what many scholars long doubted, that Polynesian navigation really could achieve the precision claimed in oral traditions. By sailing from Hawaii to Tahiti, Hokula's team was able to prove that it was possible for Polynesian peoples to migrate over thousands of miles from island to island. The success of the Hokula voyages in the 1970s sparked a renaissance in traditional navigation, proving that ancient Polynesian achievements weren't lucky accidents, but the result of sophisticated knowledge and skill. Standing on the deck of that voyaging canoe with Cube, feeling the rhythm of ancient swells beneath our feet, we witnessed the greatest navigational achievement in human history. The Polynesians didn't just cross the Pacific, they made it their own, creating a network of inhabited islands that stretched across a third of the globe. They proved that with knowledge, courage, and respect for the natural world, humans could navigate any ocean and find any destination, no matter how distant or impossible it might seem. Chapter 3. Raiders from the North. The longship cuts through icy waters as Eric the Red peers through the morning mist, searching for a glimpse of the land that will change history. It's 982 CE, and this red-bearded exile from Iceland is about to discover Greenland. Behind him lies 3 years of banishment. Ahead lies a frozen wilderness that will become the launching pad for the first European settlement of North America. But Eric doesn't know this yet. All he knows is that beyond these treacherous waters lies his chance for redemption and a new beginning. The Norse were a group of people from Scandinavia who lived in modern-day Denmark, Sweden, and Norway from the late 8th century to early 11th century. What drove these fierce peoples from their homeland wasn't just wanderlust but necessity. The Norse expansion into the North Atlantic occurred between 800 and 1000 CE. It may have been caused by a combination of population pressures and political unrest in the Norse homeland. But the Vikings were more than raiders and pillagers. While the terms Norse and Viking both refer to people from Scandinavia, Vikings are a more specific group of Norsemen who served as part-time warriors under their jarls, noble chiefs. Vikings were both merchants and warriors who sometimes raided, pillaged, and conquered settlements throughout Europe. They were also extraordinary navigators and explorers who would push the boundaries of the known world further than any Europeans before them. Their expansion began in familiar waters. The Norse people began leaving their homelands to explore and settle new territories at the end of the 8th century. They first conquered a monastery on the island of Lindisfarne off the coast of England in 793 CE, officially starting the Viking Age. But it was their westward expansion that would prove most remarkable, taking them to lands no European had ever seen. Iceland became their first major Atlantic settlement, but even this wasn't enough for the most adventurous Norse explorers. Eric the Red grew up in Norway, where he was implicated in some murder cases. Along with his father, he migrated to Iceland, where he settled on the central west coast of Iceland and married Thjodhild. However, in Iceland, Eric was involved in further disputes and killings, which resulted in his being proclaimed an outlaw and sentenced to 3 years banishment. Eric's exile became opportunity. He left Iceland around the year 982 AD to Idang for Lang to the west, spotted by a man called Gumbjorn about 100 years earlier. Eric's Greenland expedition carried him further southwest and around Cape Farewell, the southern tip of Greenland. He then sailed onward, moving north, exploring the many fjords and finding lush green pastures which were more fertile than Iceland. The timing couldn't have been better. Warmer climate in Europe and North America from around 800 to 1200 CE made it easier for the Norse to leave Scandinavia and travel by sea to new lands. Longer growing seasons in Scandinavia led to population increases, allowing more people to leave their homes to explore. This medieval warm period was crucial to Viking expansion, creating conditions that made survival possible in marginal lands like Greenland. Relatively warmer climate led to warmer ocean currents that reduced the amount of drift ice around Greenland and North America. Ocean currents carry drift ice from the Arctic to Iceland and Greenland. In cold climates, the currents carry ice south, but in warmer climates, the Gulf Stream, which carries warm water from the Gulf of Mexico to Europe, keeps drift ice at bay. Without this climatic advantage, Viking expansion into the North Atlantic would have been impossible. Eric understood the power of marketing. According to the sagas, Eric the Red, Old Norse, Eirik Raui, was banished from Iceland for manslaughter and sailed westward to the lands reported by Gunnbjorn. His crew continued past the Skerries, down the coast of Greenland, and settled on an island near Tunolirfik Fjord. He named the fjord Eiriksfjord after himself. He remained for 3 years, explored the area, and decided to found a settlement. He named the area Greenland and returned to Iceland to recruit settlers, promising tracts of land to his followers. The name Greenland was brilliant marketing for what was essentially a frozen wasteland, but Eric's strategy worked. Norse settlements on Greenland lasted almost 500 years, and the population peaked at around 2,000 to 3,000 people. These weren't temporary outposts, but permanent colonies with farms, churches, and all the infrastructure of medieval European society, somehow transplanted to one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Norse Greenland consisted of 2 main settlements. The eastern settlement was at the southwestern tip of Greenland, while the western settlement was about 500 kilometers up the west coast, near present-day Nuuk. These settlements became the staging ground for the most remarkable voyage of the Viking Age, the discovery of North America. The story begins with another case of being blown off course. According to the sagas, a merchant shipowner named Bjarni was making his way from Iceland to Greenland in 986 CE when he was blown off course by a severe storm. Bjarni's ship encountered unfavorable weather with fog and north winds, and Bjarni lost his bearings. It took several days before the weather turned for the better, and Bjarni found himself near land with woods. Bjarni realized that this wasn't Greenland, and he did not land. He spotted land twice more, but these locations also did not follow the description of Greenland that he had heard, and he continued onward. Bjarni's report of unknown lands sparked the curiosity of Eric's son, Leif. Then Leif, the son of Eirik the Red, retraced Bjarni's route in reverse. He passed a land of rock and ice, which he called Helgeland, probably Baffin Island, and then a country that was flat and wooded, which he called Markland. This was probably part of southern Labrador. He eventually reached a land which the sagas describe as a land of grassy meadows, with rivers full of salmon and enough other resources to encourage overwintering. Leif gave this land the name Vinland. The Vikings had reached North America. Evidence of the Norse west of Greenland came in the 1960s when archaeologist Anne Stein Ingsted and author Helge Ingsted excavated a Norse site at Lance O Meadows in Newfoundland. They found a bronze ring-headed pin like those the Norse used to fasten their cloaks inside the cooking pit of one of the larger dwellings. Wood from timber-framed buildings in the settlement was dated by a solar storm in 993, which caused a spike in carbon-14 in the dendrochronological layer for the year. Tree rings were counted from that year on 3 separate logs from the settlement, and all 3 were found to have been felled in 1021, indicating that the settlement was occupied at that date. This precision dating proves that Vikings were in North America exactly 1,000 years ago, almost 500 years before Columbus. But why didn't they stay? The answer lies in the challenges they faced. The great sailing trips of Leif and Thorfinn took place in the first half of the 11th century, during a climatic period in the North Atlantic called the medieval warming, a time of long warm summers and scarce sea ice. Beginning in the 12th century, however, the weather started to deteriorate with the first frissons of what scholars call the Little Ice Age. The climate that enabled Viking expansion ultimately doomed their settlements. A study of North Atlantic seasonal temperature variability showed a significant decrease in maximum summer temperatures beginning in the late 13th century to early 14th century, as much as 6-8 degrees Celsius, 11-14 degrees Fahrenheit, lower than modern summer temperatures. The study also found that the lowest winter temperatures of the last 2,000 years occurred in the late 14th century and early 15th century. The Vikings' end in Greenland was gradual but inexorable. According to Thomas McGovern, an archaeologist at Hunter College of the City University of New York, McGovern has spent more than 40 years piecing together the history of the Norse settlements in Greenland. His research reveals a community that struggled valiantly against impossible odds. In the middle of the 14th century, the colony suffered 8 harsh winters in a row, culminating in 1355, in what may have been the worst in a century. McGovern says the Norse ate their livestock and dogs before turning to whatever else they could find in their final winter there. By the mid-14th century, deposits from a chieftain's farm showed a large number of cattle and caribou remains, whereas a poorer farm only several kilometers away had no trace of domestic animal remains, only seal. The archaeological evidence tells a story of desperate adaptation as the climate closed in around them. What ultimately killed the Greenland colonies wasn't just cold, but isolation. During the period when temperatures dropped, the Black Death halved the populations of the colonists' trading partners in Iceland and Europe. The lifelines that had sustained these remote settlements for 5 centuries were cut. The last documented event recorded concerning the Greenland settlers is a high society wedding in Valsey Church in 1408 between Sigurður Björnsdóttir and Werstein Olafsson, both of whom had arrived in Iceland in 1410. The Vikings' expansion into the North Atlantic represents one of the most remarkable achievements in maritime history. They didn't just cross oceans, they made permanent homes in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. After all, Vikings were consummate seamen and peerless raiders who populated marginally inhabitable Greenland, and who would push their way into the British Isles and France. And with their iron weapons and tools, they had a technological edge over America's indigenous peoples. Yet their North American adventure remained brief. About 3 years after starting out, Thorfinn, along with his family and surviving crew, abandoned the North American settlement, perhaps in a hail of arrows. They lacked the numbers for permanent settlement and faced hostile indigenous peoples who were far from helpless. Standing on that frozen shore with Eric the Red, watching his men unload supplies from their dragon-proud ships, we witness a turning point in history. These weren't the first humans to reach Greenland or North America, but they were the first to create permanent European settlements in the New World. They proved that with skill, courage, and determination, even the most forbidding oceans could be crossed and the most hostile lands settled. Their legacy isn't failure, but achievement. The achievement of pushing human exploration to its absolute limits. 5 centuries before the rest of Europe even knew these lands existed. Chapter 4. Pathfinders of the Wine-Dark Sea. The harbor of ancient Corinth awakens before dawn as dozens of ships prepare for departure. The year is 733 BCE, and you're witnessing something unprecedented, the largest organized colonization effort in human history. These aren't desperate refugees fleeing disaster, but carefully planned expeditions designed to transplant entire civilizations across the Mediterranean. The Greeks are about to transform a collection of scattered cities into the world's first truly international culture. From around 800 BCE, ancient Greek city-states, most of which were maritime powers, began to look beyond Greece for land and resources. As a consequence, they founded colonies across the Mediterranean. The scale of this expansion was breathtaking. By the 7th and 6th centuries BC, Greek colonies and settlements stretched all the way from Western Asia Minor to southern Italy, Sicily, North Africa, and even to the coasts of southern France and Spain. What drove this massive exodus? The answer lies in the unique challenges facing Greek civilization. Greece is a country surrounded by water, and the sea has always played an important role in its history. But it's also a mountainous peninsula with limited arable land. The numerous valleys of Greece, which is on a mountainous peninsula, created a political system of hundreds of independent city-states, the Palaeus, and a terrain unsuitable for meeting the food needs of the population. Iron tools and new farming techniques allowed the Greeks to farm larger pieces of land. But as farms got bigger, they got more crowded. Soon there was not enough land for everyone living in Greece. Colonies were a solution to this problem. Population pressure was the primary driver, but it wasn't the only one. Sometimes, colonies formed as a result of civil disorder, where the losers in internecine battles left to form a new city elsewhere. Sometimes, they would form to relieve population pressure, and thereby to avoid internal unrest, and also as a result of ostracism. The Greeks approached colonization with characteristic thoroughness. The process of colonization was likely more gradual and organic than ancient sources would suggest. But when they committed to founding a new settlement, every detail was planned. First, an oracle, often the oracle of Apollo at Delphi, was consulted to determine the will of the gods. Then, a group of colonists was selected, sometimes by lot, and a leader, oikist, was chosen. The founder of the colony, oikists, first had to be identified. So too did the settlers themselves. The motives of the colonists varied, and not all migrated voluntarily to the New World. Even settlers from other city-states could join the new colony. The Oracle of Delphi was usually consulted before the move. Indeed, Delphi not only lent religious authority to what was clearly a difficult decision, but also provided important information on possible sites, and may also have attempted to define spheres of influence. Trade was usually the first step in the colonization process, and then, after local populations were subdued or included within the colony, cities were established. These could have varying degrees of contact with the homeland, but most became fully independent city-states. The main colonizing polis of southern France was Phocea, which established the important colonies of Eulalia and Massalia, c. 600 BCE. The city also established colonies, or at least established an extensive trade network, in southern Spain. The earliest Greek colonization efforts targeted familiar territory. The Greeks started colonizing around the beginning of the 8th century BC, when the Euboeans founded Pithecusae in southern Italy and Olynthus in Chalcidice, Greece. Subsequently, they founded the colonies of Cumae, Zancil, Rhegium, and Naxos. Sicily became an early favorite destination. Sicily was an early and favorite area for Greek colonizations. The Greeks occupied most of the eastern half of the island and its western coast, and many city-states sent their citizens there. The sophistication of Greek colonization becomes clear when we examine specific examples. The first recorded settlers came from Chalkis, now Chalkis, on the island of Euboea to Naxos in 734 BCE. In 733 BCE, Corinth founded Syracuse, and the same year, Corcyra in the Adriatic. These were random settlements, but carefully chosen locations that could control trade, routes, and provide access to valuable resources. Syracuse, founded by Corinth, became one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world. Its strategic position in eastern Sicily allowed it to dominate trade between Greece and the western Mediterranean. The city grew so powerful that it could challenge Athens itself. During the Peloponnesian War, the Athenian expedition to Sicily in 415 to 413 BC ended in complete disaster, demonstrating how successfully the Greeks had transplanted their urban civilization to distant shores. Greek colonial expansion wasn't limited to the West. Colonies were established in Ionia and Thrace as early as the 8th century BC. More than 30 Greek city-states had multiple colonies, dotted all across the Mediterranean world. From the late 9th to the 5th century BC, the most active colony-founding city, Miletus of the Ionian League, spawned more than 60 colonies encompassing the shores of the Black Sea in the east, the Iberian Peninsula in the west, Magna Graecia, southern Italy, and several colonies. The Black Sea region proved particularly attractive to Greek colonizers. Indeed, by this time, the Eastern Greeks controlled much of the Aegean Sea and had established independent cities to the north along the Black Sea. This region, in particular, opened up further trade connections to the north that gave access to valuable raw materials, such as gold. The Greeks established trading posts along the entire northern coast of the Black Sea, from the Danube to the Caucasus. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Greek colonization was its systematic nature. Planning was important. The selected site was carefully surveyed, and the new cities were laid out on a geometrical pattern. The original colonists received roughly equal shares of urban and agricultural land, klaroi. This wasn't haphazard settlement but organized urban planning on an unprecedented scale. The cultural impact of Greek colonization was profound. With colonization, Greek culture was exported to Italy with its dialects of the ancient Greek language, its religious rites, and its traditions of the independent polis. An original Hellenic civilization soon developed and later interacted with the native Italic civilizations. One of the most important cultural transplants was the Chalcidian, Cumaean variety of the Greek alphabet, which was adopted by the Etruscans. The Old Italic alphabet subsequently evolved into the Latin alphabet, which became the most widely used alphabet in the world. The Greeks were extraordinary synthesizers, taking the best ideas from every culture they encountered. Art and architectural styles, too, assimilated from the East, began to influence the homeland. Such features as palm column capitals, sphinx, and expressive Orientalising pottery designs would inspire Greek architects and artists to explore entirely new artistic avenues. Here, Greek goods such as pottery, bronzes, silver and gold vessels, olive oil, wine, and textiles were exchanged for luxury items and exotic raw materials that were in turn worked by Greek craftsmen. The Greeks established trading enclaves within existing local communities in the Levant, such as at Al-Mina. In the Nile Delta, the port town of Naucratis served as a commercial headquarters for Greek traders in Egypt. Greek colonies were often established along coastlines, especially during the period of colonization between the 8th and 6th centuries BC. Many Greek colonies were strategically positioned near coastlines to facilitate trade, communication, and access to maritime resources. Not all Greek colonial ventures succeeded. For a variety of reasons, including internal strife, local resistance, and unfavorable location, some colonies failed miserably. Colonization in the West came to an end in 540 BC, when a coalition of Etruscans and Carthaginians defeated a Greek fleet in the sea battle of Alalia off the coast of Corsica, and in the east as the Persians solidified their control of the eastern Mediterranean and Black Sea. But the successful colonies transformed the ancient world. The region of the Ionian Sea and that of Illyria were colonized strictly by Corinth. The Corinthians founded important overseas colonies on the sea lanes to southern Italy in the west, which succeeded in making them the foremost emporia of the western side of the Mediterranean. Important colonies of Corinth included Leucata, Astacus, Anactorium, Actium, Ambracia, and Corcyra, all in modern-day western Greece. The relationship between mother cities and colonies varied widely. Although the newly formed Peleus city-states, colonies were institutionally and politically independent of their mother cities, metropolis. These colonies oriented themselves toward and modeled themselves after their founders. Although the relationship was sometimes cooperative and other times competitive, both colony and mother city cultivated the relationship in numerous ways, politically as well as culturally. Greek colonization represents something unprecedented in human history: the systematic transplantation of an entire civilization across multiple continents. As we stand in that harbor, watching the ships depart for Syracuse, we're witnessing the birth of the first truly international culture. The Greeks didn't just explore and settle. They created a network of independent but culturally connected cities that spanned the known world. They proved that human civilization wasn't bound by geography or ethnicity, but could be carried wherever courage and vision could take it. Their legacy lives on in every democratic institution, every philosophical idea, and every scientific discovery that traces its roots back to those brave colonists who carried Greek civilization to the ends of the earth. Chapter 5. The Cedar Ships of Antiquity. The sun rises over the Red Sea as Queen Hatshepsut's expedition prepares to sail into legend. The year is approximately 1470 BCE, and these 5 sleek ships are about to undertake one of the most ambitious maritime ventures in ancient history: a journey to the mysterious land of Punt. Carved reliefs will later immortalize this voyage on the walls of her temple at Deir el-Bahari. But the true story of Egyptian maritime mastery begins much earlier, in the dawn of recorded history itself. Egyptian settlement and colonization is attested from about 3200 BC onward, all over the area of southern Canaan, by almost every type of artifact: architecture, fortifications, embankments, and buildings, pottery, vessels, tools, weapons, seals, etc. The ancient Egyptians were among the world's first maritime powers, but their achievements have been overshadowed by later civilizations. This is partly because their greatest successes lay not in conquest but in trade and exploration. Shipbuilding was known to the ancient Egyptians as early as 3000 BC, and perhaps earlier. The Archaeological Institute of America reports that the earliest dated ship, dating to 3000 BC, may have belonged to the pharaoh Aha. These weren't crude rafts but sophisticated vessels capable of both river and sea navigation. The Egyptians had to master 2 completely different maritime environments: the predictable, life-giving Nile and the challenging waters of the Red Sea and Mediterranean. The Nile shaped Egyptian civilization, but it also imposed limitations. Egyptian ships were originally designed for river travel, with flat bottoms and flexible construction that could handle the Nile's varying water levels and occasional rapids. But as Egyptian ambitions grew, so did their shipbuilding capabilities. The transition from rivercraft to seagoing vessels represents one of the great technological leaps in maritime history. Evidence of this transition appears in the earliest dynastic records. Narmer had Egyptian pottery produced in Canaan and exported back to Egypt from regions such as Arad, Anbesser, Rafaya, and Tel Arani. An area of permanent settlement may have been administered from Tel Esarchin, which is the largest Egyptian settlement in the region. This wasn't casual trade, but systematic colonization, requiring regular maritime contact across the Mediterranean. The Egyptians' most famous maritime achievement was their relationship with the land of Punt. In ancient times, the kingdom of Punt, which is believed by several Egyptologists to have been situated in the area of modern-day Somalia, had a steady trade link with the ancient Egyptians and exported the precious natural resources such as myrrh, frankincense, and gum. This trade network continued all the way into the classical era. But where exactly was Punt? The location of this legendary land has puzzled historians for millennia. Modern scholars place it somewhere along the African coast of the Red Sea, possibly in modern-day Somalia, Eritrea, or Yemen. What's certain is that reaching Punt required significant maritime expertise. The Egyptians had to navigate the treacherous waters of the Red Sea, with its coral reefs, shifting winds, and extreme heat. Queen Hatshepsut's expedition to Punt represents the pinnacle of Egyptian maritime achievement. The carved reliefs at Deir el-Bahari show her ships loading exotic goods, live myrrh trees with their roots carefully preserved in baskets, gold, ivory, ebony, live baboons, leopard skins, and most precious of all, incense. The reliefs also show the ships themselves, elegant vessels with high curved prows and sterns, multiple oars, and sophisticated rigging. These ships were marvels of engineering. The ancient Egyptians called boats that could travel in the deep seas Byblos boats, after the Phoenician city-state, but they developed their own distinctive designs. Egyptian seagoing vessels were built with cedar planks imported from Lebanon, joined with mortise and tenon construction and lashed together with ropes. This flexible construction allowed the ships to flex with ocean swells without breaking apart. The scale of Egyptian maritime trade was impressive. An early Bronze Age brewery belonging to an Egyptian settlement was found in Tel Aviv, showing that Egyptians weren't just trading with coastal communities, but establishing their own settlements abroad. Egyptian goods have been found throughout the eastern Mediterranean, from Cyprus to Crete, indicating regular maritime contact across vast distances. But the Egyptians' greatest maritime mystery involves a voyage that may have changed our understanding of ancient navigation forever. According to the Greek historian Herodotus Necho II, sent out an expedition of Phoenicians, which reputedly at some point between 610 and before 594 BC sailed in 3 years from the Red Sea around Africa to the mouth of the Nile. This would make it the first recorded circumnavigation of Africa, predating Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama by over 2,000 years. Some Egyptologists dispute that an Egyptian pharaoh would authorize such an expedition, except for the reason of trade in the ancient maritime routes. But Herodotus includes a detail that suggests the voyage really happened. The belief in Herodotus' account, handed down to him by oral tradition, is primarily because he stated with disbelief that the Phoenicians, as they sailed on a westerly course round the southern end of Libya, Africa, they had the sun on their right, to northward of them. In Herodotus' time, it was not generally known that Africa was surrounded by an ocean. This detail is crucial because it describes exactly what would happen if you sailed around the southern tip of Africa. The sun would indeed appear to the north, something impossible in the Mediterranean. Herodotus found this so unbelievable that he recorded it as evidence of the sailors' tendency to exaggerate. But modern astronomers recognize this as proof that the voyage actually took place. The Egyptian maritime legacy extended far beyond exploration. They developed sophisticated port facilities, lighthouse technology, and navigation techniques that influenced later civilizations. The Great Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, stood as a symbol of Egyptian maritime expertise for over 1,500 years. Egyptian influence on later maritime development was profound. The city-states of Masalan, Apon, Malau, Mundus, and Tab in Somalia engaged in a lucrative trade network connecting Somali merchants with Phoenicia, Ptolemaic Egypt, Greece, Parthian Persia, Saba, Nabatai, and the Roman Empire. These trading networks, established during the height of Egyptian power, continued to operate long after Egypt's decline. The Egyptians also pioneered many navigation techniques later adopted by other civilizations. They were among the first to use the stars for navigation, developing star charts and astronomical calendars that allowed for precise navigation across the Red Sea and Mediterranean. Their knowledge of seasonal wind patterns in the Red Sea, the monsoons that could carry ships south in winter and north in summer, became the foundation for later Indian Ocean trade routes. Egyptian shipyards became centers of innovation. The Egyptians were the first to develop specialized ship types for different purposes: light, fast vessels for river transport, heavy cargo ships for Mediterranean trade. and specially designed ships for Red Sea navigation that could handle both the coral reefs near shore and the deep water swells of the open sea. The religious significance of Egyptian maritime ventures cannot be overlooked. Many Egyptian expeditions were undertaken not just for trade, but to bring back materials for religious ceremonies. The incense, gold, and exotic animals from Punt were essential for Egyptian religious rituals. The gods themselves were believed to favor those who could bring back these precious materials from the ends of the earth. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Egyptian maritime achievement was its longevity. While other ancient civilizations rose and fell, Egyptian maritime trade continued for over 3 millennia. From the earliest dynastic periods around 3100 BCE to the Roman conquest in 30 BCE, Egyptian ships regularly plied the waters of the Mediterranean and Red Sea. The techniques developed by Egyptian shipbuilders influenced vessel design throughout the ancient world. The flexible rope and plank construction that allowed Egyptian ships to survive heavy seas was adopted and adapted by later civilizations. Even the famous ship of Aluburan, a Bronze Age vessel wrecked off the coast of Turkey around 1300 BCE, shows clear Egyptian influence in its construction and cargo. Egyptian maritime merchants also pioneered many of the commercial practices that would later be adopted throughout the ancient world. They developed standardized weights and measures, established regular trade routes with scheduled departures, and created credit systems that allowed for complex international transactions. These innovations made possible the vast trade networks that connected the ancient world. Standing on the deck of Hatshepsut's ship as it approaches the mysterious shores of Punt, loaded with treasures beyond imagination, we witness the culmination of thousands of years of Egyptian maritime development. These weren't just traders or explorers, but pioneers who proved that the ocean was not a barrier, but a bridge to infinite possibilities. The Egyptians showed that with skill, determination, and careful planning, any shore could be reached and any treasure obtained. Their ships carried more than goods. They carried the dreams and ambitions of one of history's greatest civilizations, connecting Egypt to the wider world and laying the foundations for the global trade networks that continue to this day. Chapter 6. The Tyrian Tide. The morning sun gleams off the polished bronze fittings of a Phoenician merchant ship as it navigates the narrow strait between modern-day Spain and Morocco. The captain adjusts his purple-dyed sail and points toward the Atlantic horizon. He is about to become one of the first humans to sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the vast unknown of the Atlantic Ocean. It's approximately 1100 BCE, and this moment will change the course of human history forever. The Phoenicians were not limited to the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. They also sailed down the Red Sea and possibly the Indian Ocean too. Their expansion represented more than just maritime achievement. It was the creation of the world's first truly global economy. From their homeland in modern-day Lebanon, Phoenician merchants would establish a network of trade routes, colonies, and cultural exchanges that spanned 3 continents and lasted over a millennium. What made the Phoenicians unique wasn't just their sailing ability, but their approach to trade and colonization. Unlike the Greeks, who transplanted entire city-states, or the Romans, who imposed political control, the Phoenicians created a more flexible system. They established trading posts and colonies, but their primary goal was commerce, not conquest. This commercial focus allowed them to adapt to local conditions and maintain relationships with diverse cultures across the Mediterranean world. The foundation of their success lay in their revolutionary approach to manufacturing and trade. Their flagship maritime industry, which turned the innards of billions of sea snails into precious drops of purple dye, became synonymous with luxury and power throughout the ancient world. But the Phoenicians traded much more than purple dye. Along with their famous purple dyes, Phoenician sailors traded textiles, wood, glass, metals, incense, papyrus, and carved ivory. In fact, the word Bible, from the Greek biblion or book, came from the city of Byblos. It was a center of the trade of papyrus, a common writing material in the ancient world. Their commercial network was staggering in scope. Driven by their desire for trade and the acquisition of such commodities as silver from Spain, gold from Africa, and tin from the Scilly Isles, the Phoenicians sailed far and wide, even beyond the Mediterranean's traditional safe limits of the Pillars of Hercules and into the Atlantic. This wasn't random exploration, but systematic commercial expansion, designed to secure the raw materials their manufacturing economy required. The sophistication of Phoenician commerce extended beyond simple trade. They were among the first to develop standardized weights and measures across their trade network. Everywhere they went, Phoenicians had standardized the sizes of their amphora jars, the shipping containers of their day. Standardization added confidence to purchases ordered from other trading stations, as buyers could trust the quantity they paid for. But their greatest innovation was financial. In another seagoing first, the Phoenicians invented maritime insurance. If merchandise was lost at sea, other shipowners would contribute toward the shortfall. This encouraged more far-reaching, risky, and sometimes more rewarding voyages. They also developed sophisticated credit systems, allowing merchants to finance expeditions and establish trade relationships across vast distances without carrying large amounts of precious metals. The reach of Phoenician trade was truly global. A string of safe harbors sprang up all around the Mediterranean to take them out to the Atlantic and back home again, to their increasingly wealthy cities. Not everyone who used these routes was on business. People from Levantan cities also plowed the sea as pirates, pilgrims, and refugees. The Phoenician network became the highway of the ancient world, carrying not just goods but people, ideas, and technologies. Their African ventures were particularly remarkable. Hanno, also called Hanno the Navigator, was a citizen of Carthage who lived during the 5th century BCE. In or about 520 BCE, the Carthaginian government directed Hanno to explore and colonize parts of West Africa. His voyage took him down the Atlantic coast of Africa as far as modern Cameroon or Gabon. In the tale, Hanno describes meeting savage tribes, volcanoes, and exotic animals such as gorillas. The precision of Hanno's account suggests these weren't tall tales, but careful observations. He describes encountering elephants, hippopotamuses, and other African wildlife with remarkable accuracy. Most importantly, he describes volcanic activity and landscapes that match perfectly with the West African coast. This wasn't casual exploration, but systematic reconnaissance designed to identify opportunities for trade and colonization. Phoenician expansion to the west was equally impressive. The sailors of Phoenicia, as most successful colony Carthage, were said to have sailed to ancient Britain in an expedition led by Himilco in c. 450 BCE. The purpose was to secure tin, an essential component of bronze that was available in Britain's Cornwall region. This trade in tin shows how far-reaching Phoenician commercial interests had become. But the Phoenicians' most controversial achievement may be their possible discovery of the Americas. Could Phoenicians have crossed the Atlantic? Some scholars believe they did. Crossing from the Mediterranean to the Americas, Beale believes, would have posed little problem for Phoenician seafarers. Phoenician boats sailed easily from Tyre and Sidon, two leading Phoenician cities that produced Murex purple dye, both now in modern Lebanon, to Gibraltar and Tangier. The evidence is tantalizing but inconclusive. No Phoenician shipwrecks have been discovered in the Americas, although legendary explorer Thor Heyerdahl and his crew successfully sailed a sedgeboat, the Rio II, from Morocco to Barbados in 1970, proving ancient seafarers could have taken advantage of the Canary Current to make the journey with available resources. The debate continues, but what's certain is that Phoenician navigational skills were advanced enough to make such voyages possible. The cultural impact of Phoenician expansion was profound. The Phoenicians were responsible for spreading the alphabet throughout the Mediterranean world. The Canaanite Phoenician alphabet consists of 22 letters, all consonants. It is believed to be one of the ancestors of modern alphabets. Through their maritime trade, the Phoenicians spread the use of the alphabet to Anatolia, North Africa, and Europe, where it likely served the purpose of communication and commercial relations. This wasn't just about writing. Phoenician letters inspired both the Greek and Aramaic alphabets, as well as roots of both Hebrew and Arabic scripts. The alphabet you're rereading right now is a direct descendant of the practical writing system developed by Phoenician merchants who needed a simple, efficient way to record their transactions across their vast commercial empire. The Phoenicians also served as cultural intermediaries, carrying ideas, technologies, and artistic styles between different civilizations. They were extraordinary synthesizers, taking the best innovations from every culture they encountered and spreading them throughout their network. Egyptian goldworking techniques, Mesopotamian textile designs, Spanish metalworking, and African ivory carving all flowed through Phoenician trade routes. Their colonies became melting pots of ancient culture. At Carthage, founded in 814 to 813 BC and called Kart Hadasht, Kart Godact, literally, new town, African, Mediterranean, and Atlantic influences combined to create something entirely new. The Carthaginians later founded their own colonies in the western Mediterranean, notably a colony in southeast Spain, Carthago Nova, extending the Phoenician cultural network even further. The political structure of Phoenician expansion was unique. The Phoenician political structure supported this trade. Foreign policy was determined by the dominant merchant class. They had an economic interest in maintaining sea lanes and making it easy to get raw materials. This commercial focus made them more flexible and adaptable than other ancient empires. Unlike the territorial empires of Egypt, Assyria, or Rome, the Phoenician Empire was based on trade networks rather than political control. They established colonies and trading posts, but these operated more like independent franchises than conquered territories. Local rulers who facilitated trade were welcomed as partners. Those who interfered with commerce were avoided or opposed. This flexible approach allowed the Phoenicians to operate successfully in vastly different cultural environments. In Spain, they worked with local Celtic tribes to extract silver and tin. In Africa, they established relationships with kingdoms along the Red Sea and Atlantic coasts. In Cyprus and Sardinia, they created hybrid Phoenician local cultures that lasted for centuries. The economic impact of Phoenician trade was revolutionary. They created the first truly international economy, with standardized currencies, credit systems, and trade routes that connected Europe, Africa, and Asia. Their commercial practices, including maritime insurance, standardized measurements, and international credit, became the foundation for all later international trade. The technological innovations that emerged from Phoenician trade networks were equally significant. Their ships were among the most advanced in the ancient world, capable of both coastal sailing and deep ocean voyages. For many years, nautical archaeologists agreed that ancient ships were constructed using the shell-first method, but Phoenician innovations in shipbuilding influenced vessel design throughout the Mediterranean. Religious and cultural exchange also flowed through Phoenician networks. Their gods, particularly Baal and Astarte, spread throughout the western Mediterranean, often syncretizing with local deities. Mystery religions, philosophical ideas, and artistic styles all traveled the Phoenician trade routes, creating the first truly cosmopolitan culture in human history. The longevity of Phoenician influence was remarkable. Their trade networks operated successfully for over 1,000 years, from roughly 1200 BCE to 200 BCE. Even after the fall of Carthage to Rome in 146 BCE, Phoenician commercial practices and cultural influences continued throughout the Roman world and beyond. Standing on that ship's deck as it passes through the Pillars of Hercules, Watching the familiar Mediterranean disappear behind us and the unknown Atlantic stretch ahead, we witnessed the birth of the global economy. The Phoenicians didn't just explore the world, they connected it, creating networks of trade, culture, and communication that spanned continents. They proved that commerce could be more powerful than conquest, that cooperation could achieve more than coercion, and that the human desire to trade, explore, and connect could overcome any barrier. Their ships carried more than cargo. They carried the dreams of a connected world, laying the foundations for the global civilization we know today. Chapter 7. The Great Southern Ocean. The massive double-hulled voyaging canoe Hokul cuts through Pacific swells under a canopy of stars as navigator Nainoa Thompson reads the ocean like an ancient text. It's 1976, but he is using navigation techniques developed over 1,000 years ago to recreate one of humanity's greatest maritime achievements, the Polynesian settlement of the Pacific. Around him, the largest ocean on Earth stretches endlessly in all directions. Yet he knows exactly where he is and where he's going, guided by knowledge passed down through generations of master navigators. The Polynesian expansion across the Pacific represents the greatest maritime achievement in human history, not just in terms of distance covered, but in the precision and skill required. The Polynesian Triangle spans 6 million square miles of open ocean and islands, and when viewed ethnically, as opposed to politically, can still be considered as one of the largest countries found on Earth today. To put this achievement in perspective, the Polynesians settled an area larger than all the continents combined, scattered across an ocean so vast that it contains 1/3 of the planet's surface. This wasn't accidental drift, but systematic exploration and settlement. Recent recreations of Polynesian voyaging have largely used Micronesian methods and the teachings of a Micronesian navigator, Mopialag. These modern reconstructions have proven that traditional Polynesian navigation could achieve the precision claimed in oral traditions, debunking earlier theories that Pacific settlement resulted from accidental drift. The timeline of Polynesian expansion reveals the systematic nature of their exploration. While originally considered to be a 20th century immigrant, a more complete analysis has shown that this haplotype has been present in Iceland for at least 300 years and is distinct from other C1 lineages. This evidence indicates a likely genetic exchange back and forth between Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland, showing that Polynesian voyagers reached not just every Pacific island but may have had contact with other ocean-crossing peoples. The islands scattered along the north shore of New Guinea first drew these canoe people eastwards into the ocean. By 1500 BC, these voyagers began moving east beyond New Guinea, first along the Solomon Island chain and then to the Banks and Vanuatu archipelagos. As the gaps between islands grew from tens of miles to hundreds and eventually thousands, the navigation challenges became exponentially more difficult. Yet the Polynesians met these challenges with increasingly sophisticated technology and techniques. They made the earliest form of navigational or oceanographic map, called stick charts. These were made of pieces of bamboo or other wood that were tied together. The charts didn't show islands as geographic features, but as wave patterns and current flows, encoding in physical form the ocean's hidden geometry. The precision of Polynesian navigation staggers modern understanding. When sailing out on the open seas in their dugout voyaging canoes, Polynesians would navigate by using the stars and all of the elements around them. In addition to following the path of the stars, navigators would use the currents and wave patterns to determine their direction and heading. But this wasn't simple observation. It required memorizing vast amounts of information and applying it with split-second timing in challenging conditions. The mental map required for Pacific navigation was extraordinary. In this star compass created by Nainoa Thompson Master Celestial Navigator, you can see how Polynesians subdivided the sky into corresponding quadrants. When a star rises at a specific point on the horizon, it will ultimately set in the opposite quadrant from where it originally rose. This system allowed navigators to maintain their bearing throughout the night as different stars rose and set. But stars were just the foundation of a much more complex system. The Polynesians also used wave and swell formations to navigate. Many of the habitable areas of the Pacific Ocean are groups of islands or atolls in chains hundreds of kilometers long. Island chains have predictable effects on waves and currents. Navigators who lived within a group of islands would learn the effect various islands had on the swell shape, direction, and motion, and would have been able to correct their path accordingly. Master navigators could feel these patterns through their bodies. An experienced navigator can sense the direction swells are coming from as they pass under the waka. If you note the direction from which the swells are coming at a time when the stars are visible, those same swells can guide you when the stars disappear. This intimate physical connection with the ocean was the heart of Polynesian navigation. Weather patterns provided additional guidance. In the Pacific, prevailing north and southeasterly trade winds push up swells that remain constant for long periods. Navigators keep their waka at the same angle to these swells. Sudden changes in waka motion indicates that it has changed course. This technique worked because Pacific weather patterns are remarkably consistent, allowing navigators to use wind and wave direction as a compass. The biological signs used by Polynesian navigators were equally sophisticated. Clouds hanging over high islands as reflections of lagoons in the sky, plants washed out into the ocean after a storm on land. Wave refraction patterns, swells, bouncing off islands alters their patterns, and birds coming out to fish during the day and then returning to their home island are all signs used to detect land. They could detect the presence of land from over 100 miles away by reading these subtle environmental cues. The strategic approach to exploration minimized risk while maximizing discovery. Most traditional navigators plan their routes using a technique known as downwind sailing. The strategy is to set a course to a point at a given latitude upwind of the target island. Then, when you reach the correct latitude, you turn and let the wind carry you to your destination. This technique expanded the target area and reduced the chance of missing small islands entirely. Some of the most remarkable Polynesian achievements involved reaching the most isolated islands on Earth. For the ancient Polynesians, finding Easter Island must have been like finding a needle in a haystack. This tiny speck of land, just 64 square miles, sits in splendid isolation over 1,200 miles from the nearest inhabited island. Yet Polynesian navigators not only founded, but established a thriving civilization there. The settlement of Hawaii represents perhaps the greatest single navigation achievement in human history. The Hawaiian Islands are among the world's most remote island groups and were one of the last major island groups to be colonized by native cultures. The Polynesians colonized the Hawaiian Islands about 500 years ago, navigating over 2,000 miles of open ocean to reach islands that cover less than 0.02% of the Pacific surface. The voyaging technology that enabled these achievements was as remarkable as the navigation techniques. For weeks, they would live aboard boats made from wood and lashings of braided fiber. Thousands of miles were traversed without the aid of sextants or compasses. These double-hulled canoes were marvels of engineering, designed specifically for ocean voyaging with stability, speed, and cargo capacity that amazed European explorers. The vessels combined multiple innovations: shallow draft for crossing reefs, flexible construction to handle ocean swells, and modular design that allowed for easy repair. The twin hulls provided stability in rough seas, while the platform between them offered space for supplies, crew, and even livestock for colonization efforts. The triangular claw sail could be quickly adjusted for different wind conditions and folded completely for storage. But the most remarkable aspect of Polynesian expansion was its cultural dimension. These weren't just random explorations, but planned migrations designed to establish new societies. When all else fails, and there's no way to keep a correct bearing, a good navigator heaves to. That is, takes down the sail and waits until he or she can set the course again. This patience and discipline characterized Polynesian voyaging. They were willing to wait for proper conditions, rather than risk their precious cargo of colonists and supplies. The social organization required for these voyages was extraordinary. Exploring waka may have followed migrating birds, as told in Maori tradition. The long-tailed cuckoo comes to New Zealand from tropical Polynesia in October, and shearwaters would have been observed flying south in September. People would have known that lamb lay in that direction, but not how far away it was. This shows how Polynesian navigators combined natural observation with cultural knowledge, using bird migration patterns as highways across the ocean. The oral traditions that preserved navigation knowledge were equally sophisticated. In traditional Maori oral history, Kupe is a legendary figure, an explorer of the Pacific Ocean. Tamana Nui Akaiwa, who set off from Hawaii in c. 1300 CE in a waka canoe to discover what lay over the horizon. These stories weren't just entertainment, but encoded navigation instructions, star charts, and sailing directions passed down through generations. The precision of these oral traditions is remarkable, but what this Araruo contains are references to stars, wind patterns, and currents that were memorized by generations of navigators. The Polynesians knew the language of the stars. They had a highly developed navigation system that involved not only observation of the stars as they rose and crossed the night sky, but the memorization of entire sky charts. The training required to become a master navigator was intensive and lifelong. Young navigators began their education in childhood, learning to read wave patterns by feeling them through the hull of canoes during short voyages. They memorized star positions, seasonal weather patterns, and the location of every known island. Most importantly, they learned to integrate all this information into the split-second decisions required for ocean navigation. The cultural impact of Polynesian voyaging extended far beyond navigation. These voyagers carried with them complete ecosystems, transporting food plants, domestic animals, and cultural practices across thousands of miles of ocean. They brought sweet potatoes from South America, pigs and chickens from Southeast Asia, and taro and breadfruit from their Pacific homelands, creating new agricultural systems on previously uninhabited islands. Modern reconstructions have validated the extraordinary claims made in Polynesian oral traditions. By sailing from Hawaii to Tahiti, Haku'ula'i's team was able to prove that it was possible for Polynesian peoples to migrate over thousands of miles from island to island. The success of these voyages sparked a renaissance in traditional navigation and proved that ancient Polynesian achievements weren't accidents, but the result of sophisticated knowledge and skill. The Haku'ula'i project began in 1973 when anthropologist Ben Finney established the Polynesian Voyaging Society to test whether ancient Polynesian navigation techniques could really achieve the precision claimed in oral traditions. Using no instruments, the canoe team navigated as their ancestors did, by the stars. They had no maps, no sextants, no compasses, and they navigated by observing the ocean and sky, reading the stars and swells. The results were spectacular. Several days away from an island, they were able to determine the exact day of landfall. Swells would tell them that there was land ahead, and the surest telltale sign would be the presence of birds making flights out to sea seeking food. This vindicated the oral traditions and proved that Polynesian navigation was indeed the sophisticated science claimed by Pacific Islanders. The broader implications of Polynesian achievement are staggering. They had accomplished something that European navigators would not match for another 1,000 years: systematic exploration and settlement of the world's largest ocean, using only traditional knowledge and techniques. They proved that human ingenuity and determination could overcome any natural barrier, no matter how vast or forbidding. The integration of different navigation techniques shows the sophistication of Polynesian wayfinding. We can also use the wind and ocean swells for telling direction on our star compass. The wind and swells move diagonally across the compass from quadrant to quadrant. This created a redundant navigation system where multiple techniques could confirm position and direction, reducing the chance of error during long voyages. But perhaps most remarkably, the Polynesians may have achieved global contact before any other civilization. There is now evidence suggesting contact between Polynesian navigators and South American peoples. Other theories suggest that the Polynesians may have actually sailed from South America. Known as Eula here in Hawaii and Kamara down in New Zealand, the sweet potato is a staple crop of ancient Polynesian cultures. That said, it's actually a crop that's native to the Americas as opposed to Polynesia, and its origins have been traced to early cultures in the area of modern-day Ecuador. This evidence suggests that Polynesian voyagers didn't just cross the Pacific but may have reached the Americas, establishing contact between the two largest landmasses on opposite sides of the world's largest ocean. More than just the Kon-Tiki, however, sweet potatoes and chicken bones demonstrate a link between Polynesians and South America. The fact that these islanders could successfully navigate across the Pacific Ocean hundreds of years before modern cultures would even discover America is reason enough to consider Polynesians the greatest navigators on Earth. Standing on the deck of Hokulea as it approaches a distant island after weeks at sea, guided only by stars and swells, we witness the culmination of humanity's greatest maritime achievement. The Polynesians didn't just explore the Pacific, they conquered it, creating a civilization that spanned a third of the planet using only traditional knowledge and extraordinary skill. They proved that no ocean is too vast, no island too remote for human determination and ingenuity to reach. Their legacy isn't just the islands they settled, but the proof that humans can achieve the impossible when they combine courage, skill, and respect for the natural world. Chapter 8. Dragon Ships in Northern Seas. The dragon-proud longship emerges from the morning mist like a creature from Norse mythology as it approaches the shores of an unknown land. At the bow stands Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, peering through salt spray at coastline no European has ever seen. It's the year 1000 CE, and this moment marks humanity's first confirmed European contact with North America. But this achievement represents more than just discovery. It's the culmination of 2 centuries of Viking maritime innovation that transformed seafaring forever. The Vikings didn't stumble upon their greatest achievements by accident. Viking expansion was the historical movement which led Norse explorers, traders, and warriors, the latter known in modern scholarship as Vikings, to sail most of the North Atlantic, reaching south as far as North Africa and east as far as Russia, and through the Mediterranean as far as Constantinople and the Middle East, acting as looters, traders, colonists, and mercenaries. What made Viking expansion unique was its systematic progression across increasingly challenging waters. The Norse expansion into the North Atlantic occurred between 800 and 1000 CE and may have been caused by a combination of population pressures and political unrest in the Norse homeland. But unlike other maritime peoples who expanded gradually along coastlines, the Vikings leapfrogged across vast oceanic distances, establishing settlements in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. Their expansion followed a deliberate pattern that reveals sophisticated planning and remarkable maritime technology. Norsemen appear to have left their homeland in search of a place where their old customs and freedoms were not so threatened. They first established control over coastal Britain and Ireland, then used these bases to launch ever more ambitious expeditions into the Atlantic. Iceland became their first major oceanic settlement, colonized around 870 C. The settlement of Iceland wasn't random but carefully planned, with detailed reconnaissance missions preceding large-scale colonization. The Landnámabók, Book of Settlements, records the names of over 400 original settlers and their land claims, showing the organized nature of Viking colonization. But Iceland was just the beginning. Eric the Red grew up in Norway, where he was implicated in some murder cases. Along with his father, he migrated to Iceland, where he settled on the central west coast of Iceland and married Thujolhild. However, in Iceland, Eric was involved in further disputes and killings, which resulted in his being proclaimed an outlaw and sentenced to 3 years banishment. Eric's exile led to one of history's most significant discoveries. He left Iceland around the year 982 AD, heading for land he'd heard of lying to the west, spotted by a man called Gumbjörn about 100 years earlier. This wasn't random exploration, but planned reconnaissance based on earlier sightings, showing how Viking exploration built systematically on accumulated knowledge. Eric's Greenland expedition carried him further southwest and around Cape Farewell, the southern tip of Greenland. He then sailed onward, moving north, exploring the many fjords and finding lush green pastures which were more fertile than Iceland. The name Greenland itself was a calculated decision. He named the area Greenland and returned to Iceland to recruit settlers, promising tracts of land to his followers. This early example of colonial marketing worked. Eric successfully recruited several hundred colonists for what was essentially a frozen wasteland. The timing of Viking expansion was crucial. Warmer climate in Europe and North America from around 800 to 1200 CE made it easier for the Norse to leave Scandinavia and travel by sea to new lands. This medieval warm period created the environmental window that made Viking expansion possible. Relatively warmer climate led to warmer ocean currents that reduced the amount of drift ice around Greenland and North America. The reduction in sea ice was critical for Viking navigation. Drift ice posed the greatest threat to sailors, so a reduction in drift ice would have allowed for easier sailing, hunting, and colonization. Lake sediment cores collected near Norse settlements in southern Greenland indicate that average annual temperatures rose about 1.5 degrees Celsius around the time the Norse settled there. Viking settlement patterns reveal sophisticated understanding of environmental challenges. Norse Greenland consisted of 2 main settlements. The eastern settlement was at the southwestern tip of Greenland, while the western settlement was about 500 kilometers up the west coast, near present-day Nuuk. These locations were carefully chosen for their agricultural potential and protection from the worst Arctic weather. The organization of these settlements revolved mainly around religion, and they consisted of around 250 farms, which were split into approximately 14 communities that were centered around 14 churches, one of which was a cathedral at Garhar. This religious organization provided the social structure necessary for survival in one of Earth's most challenging environments. But the Vikings' greatest achievement lay still further west. According to the sagas, a merchant shipowner named Bjarni was making his way from Iceland to Greenland in 986 CE when he was blown off course by a severe storm. Bjarni's ship encountered unfavorable weather with fog and north winds, and Bjarni lost his bearings. It took several days before the weather turned for the better, and Bjarni found himself near land with woods. Bjarni's accidental discovery sparked the most ambitious voyage in Viking history. Then Leif, the son of Eric the Red, retraced Bjarni's route in reverse. He passed a land of rock and ice, which he called Helgeland, probably Baffin Island, and then a country that was flat and wooded, which he called Markland. This was probably part of southern Labrador. He eventually reached a land which the sagas describe as a land of grassy meadows, with rivers full of salmon and enough other resources to encourage over -Wintering Leaf gave this land the name Vinland. And archaeological evidence has confirmed that Vikings established a settlement there. Evidence of the northwest of Greenland came in the 1960s when archaeologist Anne Stein Ingsted and author Helge Ingsten excavated a Norse site at Lance O Meadows in Newfoundland. The precision dating of this site is remarkable. Wood from timber-framed buildings in the settlement was dated by a solar storm in 993, which caused a spike in carbon-14 in the dendrochronological layer for the year. Tree rings were counted from that year on 3 separate logs from the settlement, and all 3 were found to have been felled in 1021. This scientific precision proves that Vikings were in North America exactly 1,000 years ago, almost 500 years before Columbus. But Lance O Meadows was probably also a base camp for expeditions further south. During the summer, possibly 2/3 of the camp would have been off exploring as far south as the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The archaeological evidence reveals the sophisticated planning behind Viking expansion. Some women must have been present. Artifacts found there, such as a spindle whorl, bone needle, and a small whetstone for sharpening, were a typical part of a Norse woman's everyday possessions. This shows that Viking expansion wasn't just exploration but planned colonization, involving entire families and communities. Viking shipbuilding technology was key to their success. Their longships combined several innovations: shallow draft for river navigation, flexible construction for ocean voyaging, and symmetrical design that allowed them to beach easily and reverse direction quickly. The ships could be carried over land, between river systems extending their range far beyond coastal waters. But perhaps most importantly, Viking ships were designed for different purposes. They had specialized vessels for warfare, longships, trade, nares, and exploration. The nare was particularly important for Atlantic voyaging, broader and deeper than longships, with more cargo capacity and better seaworthiness in rough ocean conditions. The Vikings also developed sophisticated navigation techniques adapted to northern waters. Another group of wayfinders noted for their early exploration and seafaring fortitude were the Vikings. They used sun compasses, polar star observations, and detailed knowledge of weather patterns and ocean currents. Viking sun compass works similarly to a sundial, allowing navigation even when the sun was obscured by clouds. Their expansion wasn't limited to the North Atlantic. Vikings under Swedish leadership penetrated deep into Eastern Europe via river systems, establishing the state of Kiev and Rus and reaching Constantinople and the Caspian Sea. This eastern expansion created trade routes between Scandinavia and the Byzantine Empire, bringing enormous wealth back to the Viking homelands. The cultural impact of Viking expansion was profound. They established permanent settlements from Greenland to Constantinople, creating a network that connected Northern Europe with the Mediterranean, North America, and Central Asia. Their influence on language, law, and culture throughout Northern Europe lasted long after the Viking Age ended. But Viking expansion also faced inevitable limitations. The great sailing trips of Leif and Thorfinn took place in the first half of the 11th century, during a climatic period in the North Atlantic called the medieval warming, a time of long, warm summers and scarce sea ice. Beginning in the 12th century, however, the weather started to deteriorate with the first frisons of what scholars call the Little Ice Age. The climate change that enabled Viking expansion ultimately ended it. A study of North Atlantic seasonal temperature variability showed a significant decrease in maximum summer temperatures beginning in the late 13th century to early 14th century, as much as Y-8 degrees Celsius, A-14 degrees Fahrenheit, lower than modern summer temperatures. This made agriculture impossible in Greenland and rendered the North Atlantic crossing increasingly dangerous. The end came gradually but inexorably. The last documented event recorded concerning the Greenland settlers is a high society wedding in Valsey Church in 1408 between Sigurður Björnsdóttir and Werstein Olafsson, both of whom had arrived in Iceland in 1410. After that, the Greenland colonies simply faded away, victims of climate change and isolation. Yet the Viking achievement remains extraordinary. In the middle of the 14th century, the colony suffered 8 harsh winters in a row, culminating in 1355, in what may have been the worst in a century. McGovern says the Norse ate their livestock and dogs before turning to whatever else they could find in their final winter there. They survived for over 400 years in one of the harshest environments on Earth, maintaining European civilization at the edge of the Arctic. Standing on that shore with Leif Erikson as he steps onto North American soil for the first time, we witness not just discovery, but the culmination of one of history's most remarkable maritime achievements. The Vikings proved that with superior technology, systematic planning, and extraordinary courage, humans could survive and thrive anywhere on Earth. They didn't just explore the North Atlantic, they colonized it, creating a network of settlements that stretched from Europe to North America. Their legacy isn't failure, but the ultimate proof that no sea is too rough, no land too harsh for human determination to conquer. Chapter 9. The Sea Roads of the Aegean. The harbor of Piraeus bustles with unprecedented activity as Athenian triremes prepare for the most ambitious naval expedition in ancient history. It's 415 BCE, and nearly 30,000 Athenians are about to sail for Sicily in an attempt to expand their maritime empire across the entire Mediterranean. The sheer scale of this expedition, 134 triremes, 5,100 hoplites, and support vessels stretching to the horizon, demonstrates how completely the Greeks had mastered the art of naval warfare and exploration. But this moment represents more than military ambition. It's the culmination of centuries of Greek maritime innovation that revolutionized how humans interacted with the sea. The ancient Greeks were active seafarers seeking opportunities for trade and founding new independent cities at coastal sites. Across the Mediterranean Sea, their achievements in navigation, shipbuilding, and maritime strategy would influence every subsequent naval power in history. Greek maritime mastery didn't emerge overnight, but developed through centuries of innovation and expansion. Ancient Greek colonization began at an early date, during the so-called geometric period of about 900 to 700 BC, when many seminal elements of ancient Greek society were also established, such as city-states, major sanctuaries, and the Panhellenic festivals. The Greek alphabet, inspired by the writing of the Phoenician sea traders, was developed and spread at this time. The geographic reality of Greece forced its people to become sailors. Greece is a country surrounded by water, and the sea has always played an important role in its history. With over 1,400 islands scattered across the Aegean and Ionian seas, and a mainland carved by countless bays and peninsulas, travel by sea was often easier than overland routes through mountainous terrain. This geographic necessity became technological opportunity. The Greeks developed several distinct types of vessels, each optimized for specific purposes. The Greek trireme was the most common ship of the ancient Mediterranean world, employing the propulsion power of oarsmen. But they also created specialized merchant vessels, coastal traders, and long-range exploration ships that could handle different maritime challenges. The trireme represented the pinnacle of ancient naval technology. These vessels were approximately 120 feet long, but only 12 feet wide, designed for speed and maneuverability rather than cargo capacity. 3 banks of oars, giving the ship its name, provided propulsion, while a bronze-sheathed ram at the bow could hold enemy vessels. The precision required to coordinate 170 oarsmen rowing in perfect Synchronization made triremes as much a triumph of human organization as naval architecture. But Greek maritime innovation extended far beyond warships. Trading vessels called Alcades could carry enormous cargoes. The largest ancient merchant ship discovered, the Alexandrian grain ship Isis, could carry 1,200 tons of wheat. These ships used sophisticated sailing rigs with multiple sails that could be adjusted for different wind conditions, allowing them to make predictable schedules across the Mediterranean. Greek navigation techniques were remarkably advanced for their time. The Greeks were among the first to use systematic astronomical observation for navigation, developing star charts and seasonal calendars that allowed for precise navigation across open water. They understood the relationship between celestial observations and geographic position, laying the foundation for scientific navigation. The sophistication of Greek navigation becomes clear when we examine their systematic approach to colonization. The process of colonization was likely more gradual and organic than ancient sources would suggest. But when they committed to founding a new settlement, every detail was planned. Planning was important. The selected site was carefully surveyed, and the new cities were laid out on a geometrical pattern. Greek colonization followed a methodical pattern that reveals their maritime capabilities. The second colonization movement can be divided into two broad phases. The first one, which lasted from around 775 BC to the early 7th BC, mainly included Euboean cities that sent colonial expeditions to the south of Italy and Sicily. In the second phase, which lasted from the early 7th to the late 6th BC, the number of cities participating in the colonization movement increased considerably, and destinations became more varied. The scale of Greek maritime expansion was unprecedented. More than 30 Greek city-states had multiple colonies, dotted all across the Mediterranean world. From the late 9th to the 5th century BC, the most active colony-founding city, Miletus of the Ionian League, spawned more than 60 colonies encompassing the shores of the Black Sea in the east, the Iberian Peninsula in the west, Magna Graecia, southern Italy, and several colonies. This expansion required sophisticated knowledge of wind patterns, currents, and seasonal weather throughout the Mediterranean. Greek sailors developed detailed understanding of the Aegean winds that blow from the north in summer, the seasonal patterns of storms, and the complex current systems that could either help or hinder long-distance voyages. The Greeks also pioneered systematic maritime trade that went far beyond simple exchange of goods. Here, Greek goods such as pottery, bronzes, silver and gold vessels, olive oil, wine, and textiles were exchanged for luxury items and exotic raw materials that were in turn worked by Greek craftsmen. This created value-added manufacturing systems that transformed raw materials from across the known world into finished products. Their trading networks were vast and sophisticated. The Greeks established trading enclaves within existing local communities in the Levant, such as Almina. In the Nile Delta, the port town of Naucratis served as a commercial headquarters for Greek traders in Egypt. These weren't just casual trading posts, but permanent commercial establishments with warehouses, workshops, and residential quarters. For Greek merchants and craftsmen, the technological innovations emerging from Greek maritime experience influenced shipbuilding throughout the ancient world. The Mediterranean offered a suitable climate, arable unoccupied land, and minerals, tin, iron, silver, and copper. They were able to establish colonies along the Black Sea coast as the native inhabitants preferred the interior. The Greeks learned to optimize different ship designs for different maritime environments. The choppy waters of the Aegean required different vessels than the long swells of the Atlantic. Approaches. Greek contributions to navigation science were particularly significant. They were among the first to attempt systematic mapping of coastlines and sea routes. While no original Greek charts survive, references in ancient literature suggest they developed detailed sailing directions, paraploi, that described routes, harbors, hazards, and navigation landmarks throughout the Mediterranean. The Greeks also advanced the science of maritime meteorology. They understood seasonal wind patterns, the relationship between weather and ocean conditions, and how to read natural signs for weather prediction. This knowledge was essential for safe navigation in the Mediterranean, where sudden storms could destroy even large fleets. Their approach to naval warfare revolutionized military strategy. The development of coordinated fleet tactics, the use of specialized ship types for different combat roles, and the integration of naval and land operations created the first truly strategic approach to maritime conflict. The victory at Salamis in 480 BCE demonstrated how superior naval tactics could defeat much larger forces. The cultural impact of Greek maritime expansion was equally revolutionary. With colonization, Greek culture was exported to Italy with its dialects of the ancient Greek language, its religious rites, and its traditions of the independent polis. An original Hellenic civilization soon developed and later interacted with the native Italic civilizations. This cultural diffusion created the first truly international civilization, with Greek ideas, art, and political systems spreading throughout the Mediterranean world. The intellectual achievements of Greek maritime culture were remarkable. The systematic approach to navigation led to advances in astronomy, mathematics, and geography. The need to coordinate complex trading networks spurred developments in commercial law, banking, and international relations. The challenges of governing far-flung colonies contributed to political innovations, including democracy, federalism, and international law. Greek maritime technology also influenced their approach to exploration beyond the Mediterranean. After the unprecedented military campaign of Alexander the Great, R336 to 323 BC, more extensive trade routes were opened across Asia, extending as far as Afghanistan and the Indus Valley. This expansion required adapting Mediterranean sailing techniques to the very different conditions of the Indian Ocean. The longevity of Greek maritime influence was extraordinary. Even after the rise of Rome, Greek navigation techniques, shipbuilding methods, and commercial practices continued to dominate Mediterranean commerce. Roman naval power was built largely on Greek foundations, and Byzantine naval supremacy extended Greek maritime traditions for another 1,000 years. The scientific approach developed by Greek navigators laid the foundation for all subsequent advances in navigation. Their systematic observation of celestial phenomena, careful recording of seasonal patterns, and mathematical approach to navigation problems created the intellectual framework that would eventually lead to the age of exploration. But perhaps most importantly, the Greeks demonstrated that maritime power could be the foundation for cultural and political dominance. The Athenian Empire at its height controlled not through land armies, but through naval supremacy, showing how control of sea routes could translate into political power. This lesson would be learned and applied by every subsequent maritime empire. The Greeks also pioneered the concept of thalassocracy, rule of the sea, showing how maritime commerce and naval power could create wealth and influence far exceeding what land-based empires could achieve. Their trading networks generated prosperity that funded the golden age of Greek art, literature, philosophy, and science. Standing in that harbor, watching the Sicilian expedition depart, we witnessed the culmination of Greek maritime achievement. These aren't just ships, but the instruments of a civilization that transformed the Mediterranean from a collection of isolated communities into a connected world. The Greeks proved that mastery of the sea could become mastery of the world. that navigation could become the foundation for empire, and that maritime technology could carry not just goods and soldiers, but the very ideas that define civilization. Their ships didn't just cross oceans, they created the connected world we know today. Chapter 10. Rivers to Infinity. The Dawnlight reveals Queen Hatshepsut's 5 magnificent ships as they prepare to depart from a Red Sea port for the legendary Land of Punt. It's approximately 1470 BCE, and these vessels represent the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian maritime technology. But this expedition is more than just trade. It's the culmination of over 1,500 years of Egyptian innovation in both river and sea navigation that created the world's first integrated water transport system. The Egyptians faced a unique maritime challenge that no other ancient civilization had to solve, mastering 2 completely different aquatic environments. The predictable, life-giving Nile required vessels and techniques perfectly adapted to river navigation, while the challenging Red Sea and Mediterranean demanded entirely different approaches to shipbuilding and seamanship. The Egyptian achievement was creating technologies and navigation systems that could handle both environments effectively. Egyptian maritime history reaches back to the very beginning of recorded civilization. Egyptian settlement and colonization is attested from about 3200 BC onward, all over the area of southern Canaan, by almost every type of artifact, architecture, fortifications, embankments and buildings, pottery, vessels, tools, weapons, seals, etc. This wasn't casual contact, but systematic expansion that required regular maritime communication across the eastern Mediterranean. The technological foundation of Egyptian maritime power lay in their revolutionary approach to shipbuilding. Shipbuilding was known to the ancient Egyptians as early as 3000 BC, and perhaps earlier. The Archaeological Institute of America reports that the earliest dated ship, dating to 3000 BC, may have belonged to the pharaoh Aha. These early vessels already showed the sophisticated construction techniques that would characterize Egyptian shipbuilding for 3 millennia. Egyptian ship construction was uniquely adapted to their dual maritime environment. Nile vessels were built with flat bottoms and flexible construction that could handle varying water levels and the river's occasional rapids. The planks were joined with mortise and tenon connections and lashed together with ropes, creating a flexible hull that could bend without breaking. This technique proved so effective that it was adapted for seagoing vessels as well. The transition from river to sea navigation required extraordinary innovation. Egyptian seagoing vessels maintained the flexible rope and plank construction, but were strengthened with additional timbers and waterproofing. Cedar planks imported from Lebanon provided the strength needed for ocean voyaging, while traditional Egyptian construction techniques ensured the flexibility required for heavy seas. The scale of Egyptian maritime operations was remarkable. Narmer had Egyptian pottery produced in Canaan and exported back to Egypt from regions such as Arad and Besser, Rafaya, and Tel Arani. An area of permanent settlement may have been administered from Tel Eisokan, which is the largest Egyptian settlement in the region. This evidence shows that Egyptians weren't just trading but establishing permanent overseas settlements that required regular naval support. Egyptian navigation of the Red Sea was particularly challenging and impressive. The Red Sea presented unique hazards, coral reefs that could destroy ships, extreme heat that could kill crews, and wind patterns that changed dramatically with the seasons. Yet, the Egyptians not only mastered Red Sea navigation, but established regular trade routes that operated for over 2 millennia. The key to Egyptian success in the Red Sea lay in their understanding of seasonal navigation. They learned to use the monsoon wind patterns that could carry ships south during winter months and north during summer. This knowledge of seasonal winds became the foundation for later Indian Ocean navigation and showed the Egyptians sophisticated understanding of large-scale weather patterns. The most famous Egyptian maritime achievement was their relationship with the mysterious land of Punt. In ancient times, the kingdom of Punt, which is believed by several Egyptologists to have been situated in the area of modern-day Somalia, had a steady trade link with the ancient Egyptians and exported the precious natural resources such as myrrh, frankincense, and gum. This trade network continued all the way into the classical era. Queen Hatshepsut's expedition to Punt represents the pinnacle of Egyptian maritime achievement and provides detailed documentation of their advanced navigation techniques. The carved reliefs at Deir el-Bahari show her ships with remarkable precision, revealing details of Egyptian naval architecture that archaeologists continue to study today. These ships featured high, curved prows and sterns, sophisticated rigging systems, and specialized cargo handling equipment. The cargo brought back from Punt demonstrates the sophistication of Egyptian maritime logistics. The reliefs show live myrrh trees with their roots carefully preserved in baskets. Live animals including baboons and leopards, gold, ivory, ebony, and precious incense, successfully transporting live trees and animals across hundreds of miles of challenging seas required advanced knowledge of ship ventilation, cargo preservation, and voyage planning. But the Egyptians' most controversial achievement may be their role in the first circumnavigation of Africa. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Necho II sent out an expedition of Phoenicians, which reputedly, at some point between 610 and before 594 BC, sailed in 3 years from the Red Sea around Africa to the mouth of the Nile. While this expedition was carried out by Phoenician sailors, it was sponsored and organized by Egypt, showing Egyptian understanding of African geography. The credibility of this account rests on a crucial detail that Herodotus found unbelievable. The belief in Herodotus' account, handed down to him by oral tradition, is primarily because he stated with disbelief that the Phoenicians, as they sailed on a westerly course round the southern end of Libya, Africa, they had the sun on their right to northward of them. This detail, which Herodotus considered impossible, is exactly what would happen when sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. Egyptian contributions to navigation science were fundamental and long-lasting. They were among the first to develop star charts and astronomical calendars for navigation, creating the foundation for celestial navigation that would be used for thousands of years. Their knowledge of the relationship between star positions and geographic location was remarkably advanced. The religious significance of Egyptian maritime ventures cannot be overlooked. Many expeditions were undertaken not just for trade, but to bring back materials essential for religious ceremonies. The incense, gold, and exotic animals from Punt were required for proper worship of the gods. This religious motivation ensured royal support for even the most expensive and dangerous maritime expeditions. Egyptian maritime technology influenced shipbuilding throughout the ancient world. The flexible rope and plank construction developed for Nile vessels was adapted by other Mediterranean civilizations. Even famous wrecks like the Ship of Oluburan, dating to around 1300 BCE, show clear Egyptian influence in construction techniques and cargo organization. The cultural exchange facilitated by Egyptian maritime networks was profound. Egyptian ships carried not just goods but ideas, technologies, and artistic styles throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond. The cosmopolitan nature of Egyptian ports, where African, Asian, and Mediterranean cultures met and mingled, created some of the ancient world's most dynamic centers of cultural innovation. Standing on the deck of Hatshepsut's flagship as it returns from Punt, loaded with treasures and exotic animals, we witness the culmination of humanity's first systematic approach to maritime exploration. The Egyptians didn't just master river navigation or occasional sea voyages, They created an integrated water transport system that connected the heart of Africa to the wider world. They proved that with systematic planning, technological innovation, and patient accumulation of knowledge, humans could navigate any waters and reach any destination. Their ships carried more than trade goods. They carried the dreams and ambitions of a civilization that saw no limits to what could be achieved through mastery of the waters. As we reach the end of our journey through the greatest maritime achievements in human history, we return to the fundamental questions that began our exploration. Who were these remarkable people who first dared to conquer the oceans? They were us humans, driven by the same curiosity, courage, and determination that continue to push the boundaries of the possible today. How did they navigate impossible distances with primitive technology? Through the same combination of careful observation, systematic learning, patient practice, and innovative thinking that drives every great human achievement. The Phoenicians, Polynesians, Vikings, Greeks, and Egyptians proved that technology is only as primitive as the minds that use it. With sophisticated knowledge and expert skills, they achieved navigation precision that wouldn't be matched for centuries. What drove them to risk everything for the unknown? The same forces that drive exploration today: economic opportunity, political necessity, intellectual curiosity, and the fundamental human need to discover what lies beyond the horizon. These ancient mariners were motivated by the same dreams and ambitions that send modern explorers to the depths of the ocean and the reaches of space. The lessons from these ancient maritime pioneers remain remarkably relevant today. The Phoenicians showed us that global networks of trade and communication could create prosperity for all participants. The Polynesians demonstrated that no ocean is too vast to cross with proper knowledge and determination. The Vikings proved that even the most hostile environments can be navigated and settled with adequate preparation and technology. The Greeks established that systematic knowledge and technological innovation can overcome any natural obstacle. The Egyptians showed that long-term planning and patient accumulation of expertise can achieve seemingly impossible goals. But perhaps their most important lesson is that the greatest barriers to human achievement are often in our minds rather than in the physical world. Every ocean that seemed uncrossable was eventually navigated. Every distant shore that appeared unreachable was eventually settled. Every technological challenge that seemed insurmountable was eventually solved. Today, as we face new challenges: climate change, resource depletion, space exploration, we can draw inspiration from these ancient maritime pioneers. They proved that human ingenuity, determination, and cooperation can overcome any obstacle. They showed us that the only real limitations are those we accept. The ancient mariners didn't just explore the world, they connected it, creating the foundation for the global civilization we inhabit today. Their ships carried more than cargo. They carried human dreams across the waters, proving that no distance is too great for human ambition to bridge. Their legacy lives on in every journey we take, every connection we make, and every new horizon we dare to explore. The oceans they conquered are still there, still calling to new generations of explorers to discover what lies beyond the horizon.